I, Blaine Higgs, do swear that I will be in all things to be treated to be of the Executive Council of this province, truly and faithfully.
New Brunswick has a new premier. Earlier today, PC leader, as you can see there, Blaine Higgs, was sworn in, replacing Brian Gallant. Gallant's Liberal government was defeated on a confidence vote after a September election left them with fewer seats than the PCs. New Premier Higgs has a tough job ahead, keeping the confidence of a legislature that's made up of 22 Tories, 21 Liberals, 3 Greens, and 3 People's Alliance MLAs. So what is the Premier's plan to govern in a minority, and how will he win over opposition support? New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs is in Fredericton. Hi, Premier Higgs. Great to have you back on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Good evening.
Premier, you said today you'll be meeting with other parties soon about what they'd like to see in your speech from the throne, which is slated for November 20th. What will you offer in that speech that Brian Gallant didn't last week?
Well, it won't look anything like the previous throne speech, because I made it pretty clear in my response to that one, and in my comments today. I'm not trying to buy support. I never have through this whole process. I'm looking for people to have genuine engagement as we fix New Brunswick. So I want their priorities in the sense of, what's very important for them to see happen and change. It won't be a shopping list. It'll be, a few priority items that we'll work on together to get results, and then we'll move on to a few more. But it's not going to be the Sears wish book.
What's your priority?
Well, in New Brunswick, of course, there's been some major challenges economically. So, what are some of the big ticket items that we can move forward with to help, bring people back? Addressing some of the issues. I mean, the paramedic issue has been a challenge. We have shortages coming up in healthcare professionals in the nursing field. Our education system is not performing like it should. So there's 3, 4 right there that we're going to get action on, but they'll be common ones. Results in health, in relations again with, wait times and number of doctors with, people without family doctors or access to primary care. These are common issues that'll be reflected in the throne speech.
Let me drill down on a couple of those that you mentioned, and I'll start sort of with the economy and the state of the books, because you have expressed concern that I think spending was growing at twice the rate of inflation in New Brunswick, and you've also promised to balance the books, I believe, by 2021. Does that mean that you'll cut spending, and if so, where?
Well, my plan is certainly not to continue spending money on things that aren't getting results. And there's, when I say it's growing at twice the rate of the economy, in some cases 3 times, you have to say, okay, so what have we got to show for that? And when you can't point to a single area where we're actually getting results or improvement in service delivery to what I term our customers, which are the taxpayers of the province, somewhere we're spending money that's not getting results. And those are the areas I'll stop spending.
So what? Like, what's an example of that?
Well, that's where we'll get under the hood to look. I mean, we've just started this week. We've had multiple meetings with departments, getting the fiscal state of the province. Things that are hurting businesses, like the WorkSafe. We had a report today or a few days ago, and our WorkSafe compensation, the premiums are going through the roof. I mean, we're expecting an increase this year alone that's as much as some people are paying in other provinces. So I've met with the group already. We have an action plan to work to get those rates back under control. Those are affecting businesses that ultimately affect employees and employers. So these are action items that you'll see that when we find out there's a problem, we won't waste a lot of time talking about it. We'll get on and fix it.
I'm just wondering, though, when you do talk about spending growing at that rate, and then at the same time you're saying you're going to balance the books in a certain time frame, does that mean that, for example, public servants should be worried about their jobs? Will there be large-scale spending cuts?
We've said, Vashi, that no one's going to lose their job, but we will look at retirements, and as people retire, we'll look and see if it makes sense to have a replacement. But we're not. No, I don't believe that any exercise is beneficial when you take the framework you're just going to make cuts, because it doesn't last. I've asked sincerely for the civil service to help us fix the province. And what they bring forward are ideas that they say, why are we spending money here? Why are we wasting this? I can't do it without them.
Do you think it's still realistic saying that, though, to be able to balance the budget by 2020?
I do indeed.
And so you still guarantee you will?
Yes, that's the focus.
Okay.
We're in fact going to bring legislation forward when we sit in the House to require that to happen.
To require that you'll bring in balanced budget legislation?
We had before a Fiscal Transparency Accountability Act that had a described formula to get to balance. It was $125 million a year, and our current balance right now, our deficit, is in that range. But there's a lot of spending that's been promised that we have to look at to just understand the validity of it.
Okay, let me ask you about the other issue you highlighted that you said you likely will address in the throne speech, and that's the issue of paramedic shortages. Are you willing to take away or do what you can? I know it's based on a court decision, but do what you can to remove the condition paramedics be bilingual in order to address those shortages?
We've met, and we met collectively with the Alliance and Medavie and ourselves with Medavie to look at what options exist. And they presented us with some, jointly, some very, very good options that do not negatively impact, do not require any changes to our Official Languages Act, but get the job done. And in the interim period about looking at this arbitration case, it makes sense to do what we need to get ambulances on the road, but it's an interim solution, as was put forward on the case. We won't be carrying on fighting this in a court case because it's not a court case. It was a consent order. It wasn't a judicial order. And it's been made to be a language issue when it's a health issue. So
let me be clear, though, then. Do you think ambulance drivers or paramedics should be bilingual?
Yes, we've said in our statement that that's part of our requirement, as that we have it legally, and we don't need to change that. But the consent order allows us to get ambulances on the road and have an interim period here in order to meet those language requirements and put health first and foremost across the province.
Okay, and let me ask you about another subject, and that is the fight against the federal carbon tax. A number of your Conservative colleagues, or counterparts, I should say, in other provinces have joined forces to try and legally fight that federal carbon tax. Will you join them? Yes,
I've already told Premier Ford, I've told Premier Moe Saskatchewan, and Brian Pallister in Manitoba, and I know Alberta has issues there, and we've said that we will be working with them. We're looking at all options in that regard, but we've said a new tax on New Brunswickers is not acceptable.
Okay, so the federal government says that the average New Brunswick family of 4 will pay $207 and get a $256 rebate, so they'll have a net gain of $49. On October 23rd, you said if New Brunswickers are getting more money than they're being taxed, then I'd have a hard time arguing about it.
I think I also said that sounds like Liberal math. So in that same vein, I have met with Dominic LeBlanc. In fact, I just came from a meeting with him today in which we're going to have their officials do a presentation to us next week and understand. I don't want to talk about anything without understanding all of the facts. And so that was the purpose of that first meeting. And next week we're meeting with the details with staff. And we'll understand everything. So, I will make decisions based on facts. But I don't think there's any question here that our goal is that we will not have any new taxes on the citizens of this province.
So you won't impose a carbon tax, but are you? Does your conversation with Minister LeBlanc mean that you are open to not fighting the federal one? What exactly does it mean? Or are you dead set on that?
No, at this stage, Vashi, my goal is to work with those provinces that are opposing them and work with them to fight this in a court challenge.
In a court challenge. Do you have a timeline for that?
Well, I've had initial discussions with Premier Ford, and the intent is to meet with the group in the coming 2 to 3 weeks, but let's say not later than early December, and then map out the strategy from there. So I'll have joint meetings, but we're still on track to stay very strong against a carbon tax imposed on us.
Are you concerned about what that does to any potential support from the Greens?
Well, we have different views on how we fight emissions. I believe sincerely that we can meet our emission standards and targets, and that's got to be the goal. A new tax shouldn't be the goal. Fighting the emissions and reducing them should be the goal. And New Brunswick is on track meeting the national emissions. We're already there and will be on the timeline of 2030. So let's just make sure we understand the objectives, and let's make sure we're not building a box for New Brunswick that makes it difficult for us to compete with other provinces or with the U.S. or elsewhere. That's my concern, is that we're building an unfair competing field that makes New Brunswick difficult.
Did Minister LeBlanc indicate to you at all that the federal government might be open to a plan from New Brunswick that isn't exactly what, certain provinces did get certain exemptions? Did he indicate that your province might be one of them?
Yes, he did. That was a potential, and so just so that we have all of the details on it, again, not in being in isolation. That's why we have the meeting scheduled for next week.
And what did he say about the possibility of New Brunswick being exempted?
No, I think we had a briefing on what the other provinces have done, particularly Newfoundland and PEI and Nova Scotia, and so the discussion was around, is there that same possibility for New Brunswick? And you know, my position is clear that we don't want a new tax, but I said I will be entertaining the meeting because I want to know all the details. And I'll make every decision in that same regard, understanding the details and sharing them with the Greens, with the Alliance, and with the Liberals.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Premier. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Vashti. Have a good evening.
You too.